The slap stung my cheek at 6 in the morning, leaving a mark I had to cover before church. My stepmother thought violence would force me to sign her papers, but she underestimated the woman in the front pew. When my grandmother took the microphone during the sermon, everyone expected a prayer. Instead, she looked at my stepmother and started telling the truth about who the real sinner in the family was. My name is Lena Hartley, and at 32 years old, I never imagined I would be waking up in the twin-sized bed of my childhood room, staring at the water stains on a ceiling I thought I had left behind forever, the digital clock on the nightstand, a relic from high school with glowing red numbers, read 6 in the morning, outside the window. The sky over Brookside, Ohio, was still a bruised purple, refusing to let the sun break through just yet. But it was not the lack of light that made my chest tight. It was the sound of a fist hammering against my bedroom door. The banging was not frantic, like an emergency. It was rhythmic, authoritative, and angry. It was the sound of someone who believed they owned the space on the other side of the wood. "Lena, get up!" The voice belonged to Denise, my stepmother. It was a voice that could switch from honey sweet to vinegar sour in the span of a single breath, a talent she had perfected over the 15 years she had been married to my father. "I know you are awake in there," she shouted, the wood rattling in its frame. "Do not make me come in and drag you out. We have a schedule." I sat up, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. My body felt heavy, weighed down by the accumulation of months of bad news. I was a data analyst, or at least I used to be. I had spent the last 5 years at Northline Data Systems in Columbus, crunching user behavior numbers and predicting market trends. I was good at it. I made sense of chaos. But when the tech sector took a hit and the company restructured, I became just another row on a spreadsheet marked for deletion. 2 months of unemployment, a depleted savings account, and a lease I could not break later. I was back here, back in my father's house, back in the line of fire. "I am coming," I called out, my voice raspy. "Open the door, Lena, now." I swung my legs over the side of the bed. The floorboards were cold. I was an adult woman. I paid my own taxes. I had a degree. I had lived a life entirely separate from this toxic ecosystem for a decade. Yet, the moment my feet touched this carpet, I felt the old defenses rising, the muscle memory of a teenager trying to make herself small. But I was not small anymore. I walked to the door and unlocked it. Denise stood there, fully dressed for the Sunday service at New Grace Fellowship. She was wearing a navy blue suit that cost more than my first car. Her hair sprayed into a helmet of blonde perfection that would not move even in a tornado. She smelled of expensive floral perfume and aggressive piety. Behind her, hovering in the hallway like a ghost haunting his own house, was my father, Mark. He was in his bathrobe, holding a mug of coffee that shook slightly in his hand. "Keep it down, Denise," Dad whispered, his eyes darting toward the front window as if the neighbors could see through the walls. "It is 6 in the morning on a Sunday. The Johnsons will hear you." "Let them hear," Denise snapped, not looking at him. Her eyes were locked on me. She looked me up and down, her lip curling in that familiar expression of distaste. I knew what she saw: messy hair, an oversized t-shirt, the dark circles under my eyes that no amount of sleep seemed to fix. She saw a failure. She saw a burden. "You look terrible," she said. "Good morning to you too, Denise," I said, leaning against the doorframe. I refused to let her see me flinch. "Service does not start until 9. Why are you pounding on my door at dawn?" "Because we have business to settle before we leave this house," she said. She thrust a folder at me. It was a thick blue legal folder, the kind you see in lawyers' offices. I took it, my instincts instantly sharpening. My time at Northline had taught me to pay attention to the details, and the label on the front of this folder made my stomach drop. It read, "Eleanor Hartley, Asset Management and Ministry Contribution Plan." "What is this?" I asked, flipping the cover open. "It is a family agreement," Denise said, stepping into my room without asking. She began pacing, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor that bordered the rug. Your father and I have been discussing this for weeks, with your grandmother's health being what it is, and with you, well, being in the situation you are in. We need to streamline things. I scanned the first page. The legal jargon was dense, but the intent was crystal clear. It was a waiver, a total and complete waiver of rights. By signing this, I would be agreeing that all of Eleanor Hartley's assets, her house, her savings, her investments, would be placed under the protective stewardship of Mark and Denise Hartley. It also included a clause about a significant legacy donation to the New Grace Fellowship Building Fund. And there, at the bottom of the second page, was a line specifically for me. It stated that I, Lena Hartley, acknowledged that I had no claim to any support or inheritance, and that I agreed to the terms of this restructuring for the greater good of the family unit. You want me to sign away my rights to Grandma's estate? I looked up, my grip on the folder tightening. Does Grandma even know about this? Eleanor is confused, Denise said quickly, waving her hand as if swatting away a fly. She gets confused. Lena, you know that. She forgets things. Last week she thought it was 1995. We are doing this to protect her, to make sure her money does not get wasted or stolen by people who do not have her best interests at heart. She paused, her eyes narrowing on me. And frankly, Lena, considering you are currently living under our roof, eating our food, and using our electricity without contributing a single dime, I think signing this is the least you can do to show some gratitude. I felt a cold flush of anger rise up my neck. I moved back 2 weeks ago. I have bought my own groceries, and I transferred $300 to Dad for utilities yesterday. $300, Denise scoffed. That does not even cover the shame of having you back here, a 32-year-old woman, jobless, single, hiding in her father's house like a wounded animal. You are a drain. Lena, you have always been a drain. Denise, please, Dad said from the hallway. His voice was thin, pathetic. Do not talk to her like that. Shut up, Mark, Denise hissed, not turning around. She took a step closer to me, invading my personal space. Sign the papers, Lena. We are bringing them to the church office this morning. Reverend Allen is going to witness them before the service. It is all arranged. I looked at the papers again. I looked at my father, who was staring at his coffee mug as if the secrets of the universe were swimming in the black liquid. He would not help me. He never had. He chose the path of least resistance, and the path of least resistance was always whatever Denise wanted. No, I said. The word hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Denise blinked, as if she had not heard me correctly. Excuse me? I said no, I repeated, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. I closed the folder and held it out to her. I am not signing this. Not until I have read it properly, not until a lawyer looks at it, and definitely not until I talk to Grandma Eleanor myself. You will not talk to her, Denise said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You will not upset her with your greed. My greed? I laughed. A short, humorless sound. You are the one trying to seize control of her life before she is even gone. I am not signing. Denise, period. Denise's face turned a splotchy red. The mask of the pious church lady slipped, revealing the sheer, unadulterated rage beneath. She snatched the folder from my hand, tossing it onto my unmade bed. You ungrateful little parasite, she spat. You think you can just waltz back in here and dictate terms? After everything I have done for this family? After I raised you? You did not raise me, I said, looking her dead in the eye. You just lived in the same house while I grew up. It happened so fast I did not even see her hand move. Crack. The sound was louder than the pain at first. Her palm connected with my cheek, a sharp, stinging impact that snapped my head to the side. It was not a playful tap. It was a full-force slap, delivered with the intent to hurt, to humiliate. The room went silent. I stood there, stunned. My hand went to my face, my skin burning hot where she had struck me. I was an adult. I had not been hit by anyone since I was a child. And even then, never like this. This was a violation. This was assault. "Denise!" Dad yelled. Finally stepping into the room, he grabbed her arm, but his grip was gentle, pleading rather than restraining. "Stop it. What are you doing?" "She needs to learn her place." Denise breathed heavily, her chest heaving. She did not look sorry. She looked exhilarated. She pointed a manicured finger at me. "You are a guest here, Lena, and a barely welcome one at that. Do not ever speak to me about how I raised you. I cleaned up your messes. I tolerated your attitude. And I am the only reason this family still has a standing in this town." I leaned back against my dresser, the wood digging into my lower back. My cheek throbbed, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. I could feel the tears pricking at the corners of my eyes, not from sadness, but from the sheer shock of violence. But I forced them back. I would not cry. Not in front of her. My hand drifted to the shelf behind me, where my phone sat charging. It was a reflex, a survival mechanism born from years of analyzing data, of needing proof. With a subtle movement, I swiped the screen awake and tapped the voice memo icon. The red circle began to pulse. "You hit me," I said, my voice quiet, cold. I wanted her to say it. I needed it on record. "I disciplined you," Denise corrected, straightening her jacket. She smoothed her hair, composing herself as if nothing had happened. "Because you are acting like a child. And if you do not sign those papers, Lena, I promise you, the consequences will be much worse than a slap." "Is that a threat?" I asked. "It is a promise," she said. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so Dad couldn't hear the specifics, but the phone heard. The phone heard everything. "If you do not sign that agreement by the time we leave for church, I will make sure Eleanor hears a very different story about why you came back. I will tell her you stole money from us. I will tell the Reverend that you were fired for embezzlement. I will ruin your name in this town so thoroughly that you will not be able to get a job scrubbing toilets at the gas station." She smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. It was the smile of someone who believed they were untouchable because they sat in the second pew every Sunday. "Grandma won't believe you," I said. "Won't she?" Denise raised an eyebrow. "She is old, Lena. She is scared, and I am the one who brings her groceries. I am the one who drives her to the doctor. Who do you think she relies on? Me, not the granddaughter who disappeared for 5 years and only came back when she went broke." Dad was standing by the door, wringing his hands. "Please, just... everyone calm down. Lena, maybe just look at the papers later. Denise, let's go get breakfast started. We have to be at the church early for the donor ceremony." Denise turned her back on me, dismissing me as if I were furniture. "Get dressed, Lena. Wear something appropriate. Cover up those dark circles. You look like a junkie." She marched out of the room, grabbing the blue folder from the bed as she went. "5 minutes. Mark," she called out from the hallway, her voice back to its normal, commanding volume. Dad looked at me. There was apology in his eyes, but it was weak, diluted by years of cowardice. "Put some ice on that," he mumbled, and then he turned and followed her. I was alone. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. My legs felt shaky, so I slid down against the dresser until I was sitting on the floor. I reached for my phone and stopped the recording. Saved. 6:12 in the morning. I touched my cheek again. It was tender, and I knew it would be read. Denise thought this was the end of the conversation. She thought she had asserted her dominance, shocked me into submission with physical force and the threat of social annihilation. She thought I was the same scared teenager who used to hide in this room, waiting for the storm to pass. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I stood up and walked into the small bathroom attached to my room. The fluorescent light flickered to life, casting a harsh glow on my reflection. The mark was there, a blossoming crimson patch on my left cheek, the imprint of her fingers beginning to form. I opened my makeup bag. I took out the heavy-duty concealer I usually saved for disastrous breakouts. I began to dab it onto my skin, blending the beige liquid over the red. Layer by layer, I erased the evidence of her violence. "I will go to church," I whispered to my reflection. I would put on my nice dress, I would walk into New Grace Fellowship, I would sit in the pew, but I would not sign those papers. Denise wanted a war. She wanted to play games with reputation and truth. She thought she held all the cards because she controlled the narrative in Brookside. But she didn't know about the recording. She didn't know that for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking for a way out. I was looking for a way to burn the whole lie to the ground. I finished blending the makeup. The mark was gone, invisible to the naked eye, but I could still feel the heat of it. I capped the concealer, threw it back in the bag, and stared at myself one last time. My eyes were hard. The exhaustion was still there, but something else had joined it, a cold, sharp resolve. I grabbed my purse, checked that my phone was secure in the pocket, and opened the door. The smell of bacon and coffee wafted up from the kitchen, a sickeningly domestic scent for a house that felt like a battlefield. I walked down the stairs, the silence of the morning broken only by the sound of my own footsteps. I was going to church, and God help anyone who tried to stop me from speaking the truth today. The drive from Columbus back to Brookside had taken 3 hours, but it felt like traveling back in time 15 years. I remember gripping the steering wheel of my Honda Civic, the back seat packed to the roof with boxes of books, clothes, and the remnants of my life as an independent woman. It was raining that day, a gray, miserable drizzle that matched the hollow feeling in my chest. I had been a senior data analyst at Northline Data Systems. I had a salary that allowed me to buy organic produce without looking at the price tag, and a savings account that made me feel safe. Then came the meeting on a Tuesday afternoon. The grim faces of HR representatives, and the phrase, corporate restructuring. Just like that, my safety net was slashed. I held out for 2 months. I applied for jobs. I did freelance consulting. I drained my emergency fund down to the last $300. But the tech market was freezing over, and my lease was up. Swallowing my pride tasted like ash, but I had no choice. I called my father. Moving back into the house on Elm Street was not a homecoming. It was a surrender. My mother died when I was 10 years old. Her name was Sarah, and she was soft edges and warm laughter. 2 years after the cancer took her, my father, Mark, married Denise. If my mother was a watercolor painting, Denise was an architectural blueprint, rigid, precise, and intolerant of errors. She was a beautiful woman in a sharp, angular way, always put together, always performing, to the outside world. She was the saint who took on a widower and his grieving daughter. Inside the house, she was an airlock, slowly sucking the oxygen out of the room until everyone else passed out. From the moment she unpacked her bags in our house, Denise made it clear that I was a project to be managed, not a child to be loved. As a teenager, it was constant critiques about my weight, my grades, my hair, my laugh. She never hit me. She was too smart for that. Physical bruises leave evidence. Whispers destroy the soul without leaving a mark. She would sigh when I walked into a room, as if my very presence was exhausting. She would rewash dishes I had just cleaned, loudly clanking the plates to let me know I had failed. Now, as a 32-year-old woman, the dynamic had shifted, but the toxicity remained. It was just more sophisticated. When I arrived with my boxes, Denise did not offer to help carry anything. She stood on the porch, arms crossed over her cashmere cardigan, watching me struggle up the steps with a crate of books. "We have cleared out your old room," she said by way of greeting. "But we use the closet for storage now, so you will have to keep your clothes in the dresser, and try not to scratch the walls. We just had them painted a very expensive shade of eggshell." "Hello to you too." "Denise," I muttered, kicking the screen door open. Dad was in the living room, watching golf. He gave me a quick, tight hug, patting my back with the awkward rhythm of a man who loves his daughter, but loves his peace of mind more. "Good to see you, kiddo. Sorry about the job. It is a tough economy out there." "It is temporary," I said, trying to believe it myself. "Just until I find something else." "Take your time," Dad said, but his eyes flicked to Denise, checking her reaction. "Not too much time," Denise corrected, walking into the room. Idleness is the devil's workshop. Lena, we do not want you getting comfortable being unemployed. That evening, she presented me with the terms of my stay. It was not a conversation. It was a briefing. She sat at the kitchen table with a notepad, wearing her reading glasses. Since you cannot contribute financially right now, aside from that $300 you mentioned, which frankly barely covers the heating bill for a month, we expect you to contribute labor, Denise said. She slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a list, a long one. Monday, deep clean baseboards and crown molding. Tuesday, yard work, weeding the flower beds, front and back. Wednesday, polish the silver and organize the pantry. Thursday, laundry, including linens. Friday, grocery shopping and meal prep for the weekend. I am looking for a job, Denise, I said, staring at the list. I need time to interview, to network. This is a full-time housekeeping schedule. You have 24 hours in a day, she replied without looking up. If you wake up at 5, you can get the housework done by 10. That leaves you plenty of time to sit on your computer. We are doing you a favor. Lena, this is how you show gratitude, unless you prefer to pay market rate for rent. I looked at Dad. He was studying his cuticles. It seems fair, Lena, he murmured. We are a family. We help each other. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the list in her face, but I had $80 in my wallet and nowhere else to go. So I took the list. The only thing that kept me from getting back in my car and driving into a ditch was my grandmother, Eleanor. Eleanor Hartley was a legend in the Midwest, though you would never know it by looking at her sensible shoes and knit sweaters. Decades ago, she and my grandfather had started a small grocery store that grew into a regional empire. She had sold the chain 10 years ago for a sum that was never discussed openly, but was understood to be massive. She lived in a large Victorian house on the north side of town, a place that smelled of lavender and old paper. Grandma Eleanor was the only person in this family who saw me. When I was a teenager, and Denise would make me cry by telling me no boy would ever date a girl with such loud opinions, I would ride my bike to Grandma's house. She would feed me homemade shortbread and tell me stories about how she negotiated with unions and suppliers, men who thought they could bully a woman. You have fire in you, Lena. She used to tell me, her hands trembling slightly even then. Don't let them douse it. They want you to be a candle, pretty and contained. You be a bonfire. But Denise had her claws in Eleanor, too. On Sundays, the performance reached its peak at New Grace Fellowship Church. This was the center of social gravity in Brookside. If you were anyone, you had a pew at New Grace. Reverend Allen, a man with a smile too wide and a handshake too firm, treated the Hartleys like royalty. Why wouldn't he? Grandma Eleanor's name was on the new wing of the Sunday school. Denise played the role of the devoted daughter-in-law to perfection. She drove Eleanor to church every Sunday in Dad's pristine SUV. She held Eleanor's arm as they walked up the steps, leaning in to whisper things that made the older women in the congregation coo with admiration. Look at Denise, they would say. Such a servant's heart, taking care of Mark's mother like that. They didn't see what I saw. I saw the way Denise pinched Grandma's arm just a little too hard if she walked too slowly. I saw the way she interrupted Grandma whenever she tried to tell a story, laughing a sharp, artificial laugh. Oh, Mother, nobody wants to hear about the produce pricing in 1972 again. And worst of all, I saw how she pushed me out of the frame. The first Sunday I was back, we took a family photo in the church lobby. Denise positioned herself right next to Grandma, her arm draped possessively over Eleanor's shoulders. When I tried to stand on the other side, Denise tutted. No, Lena, you are too tall. You block the light. Stand on the end. Further over. A little more. By the time the camera clicked, I was barely in the picture, a blurry figure on the periphery, while Denise beamed in the center, looking for all the world like the matriarch in waiting. Lena is having a hard time, I heard Denise telling Mrs. Higgins, the choir director. Later that morning during coffee hour, I was standing near the donut table, pretending to read a pamphlet. She just cannot seem to keep a job. I think corporate life is too demanding for her temperament. She is a bit unstable, but we are happy to support her. It is what families do." She said it with a sigh of long-suffering charity. Mrs. Higgins nodded sympathetically, casting a pitying glance my way. "You are a saint, Denise, truly." I felt the bile rise in my throat. Denise was using my misfortune as currency. She was buying social status with my failure. I tried to talk to Dad about it later that week. He was in the garage, tinkering with a lawnmower that worked perfectly fine, his preferred method of escaping the tension in the house. "She is telling people I am unstable, Dad," I said, handing him a wrench. "She is painting this picture of me as some charity case." "She is just worried about you," Dad said, not meeting my eyes. "Denise has a certain way of talking. You know that. She likes things to look proper." "It is not about looking proper. It is about making me look small so she looks big. Why do you let her do that?" Dad wiped his greasy hands on a rag. He looked tired. He had looked tired for 15 years. "We are a Christian family, Lena. We do not air our dirty laundry. We keep the peace. Denise does a lot for us. She manages the house. She takes care of your grandmother." "She controls my grandmother," I corrected. "Lower your voice," he hissed, glancing at the door connecting to the house. "Please, Lena, just keep your head down. Get a job, move out, and then you can live however you want. But while you are here, do not rock the boat. I cannot handle the noise." That was it, the core of my father's existence. He didn't care about truth. He cared about volume control. The turning point, the moment my sadness began to calcify into suspicion, happened on a Thursday night, 3 weeks after I returned. I had stayed up late applying for remote data entry jobs, desperate for any income that would get me out of that house. Around 1 a.m, I went downstairs to get a glass of water. The house was old. The floorboards settled and groaned, but I knew where to step to be silent. It was a skill I had mastered as a teenager coming home past curfew. As I approached the kitchen, I saw a sliver of light under the door of the sunroom. Denise was in there, and she was talking. I stopped. I shouldn't have listened. I should have walked away. But something in her tone, hushed, urgent, aggressive, froze my feet. "I do not care what the lawyer said last week," Denise was saying. She must have been on her cell phone. "The old woman is slipping. I can get her to sign anything if I catch her at the right time. Usually after her afternoon nap. She is groggy." My heart hammered against my ribs. I pressed myself against the wall, holding my breath. "No, Mark is not going to be a problem," Denise continued. "He will do what I tell him. He thinks it is for the best. The important thing is that we secure the power of attorney before the end of the fiscal year. I want control of the portfolio, not just the house." There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. "Lena?" Denise scoffed. "Please, she is a non-factor. She is broken. She will be gone in a few months, or I will make her life so miserable she runs away again. The trust needs to be rewritten so that the discretion lies with us. The money has to flow in the right direction, and that direction is this household, not some charity or some estranged granddaughter." She laughed then, a low, nasty sound. "Don't worry. I have been working on Eleanor for years. She trusts me. She thinks I am the daughter she never had." I backed away slowly, step by careful step, until I reached the stairs. Then I ran up them on my toes, my pulse roaring in my ears. I closed my bedroom door and leaned against it, sliding down until I hit the floor. It wasn't just petty cruelty. It wasn't just that she didn't like me. This was a heist. Denise was systematically isolating my grandmother, gaslighting my father, and discrediting me to the entire town, all for one purpose: to hijack Eleanor Hartley's estate. She was waiting for Grandma to die, or at least to lose her mind enough to sign over the keys to the kingdom. And I was the only obstacle. That was why the chore list was so long. That was why the insults were so constant. She wanted me to break. She wanted me to leave so she could finish the job without a witness. I crawled into bed, pulling the thin quilt up to my chin. The ceiling above me was cracked. the plaster peeling in the corner. I felt small. I felt overwhelmed. I was fighting a woman who had the church, the community, and my own father in her pocket. Was coming back a mistake? Should I just pack my car in the morning and drive until I ran out of gas? Then I remembered Grandma Eleanor. I remembered the last time I saw her, before the layoff. She had held my hand with a grip that was surprisingly strong. She had looked at me with those clear, gray eyes that had seen 80 years of history, and smiled. "You are the only real thing in my life, Lena," she had whispered. If I left, Denise won. If I left, Grandma died alone, surrounded by vultures pretending to be doves. I turned over, staring at the dark window. I would not leave. I would not let them take her legacy. Denise thought I was just a broken girl she could bully into submission. But she forgot what I did for a living. I analyzed data. I found patterns. I uncovered hidden truths buried in mountains of noise. I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I started planning. This was not a family anymore. It was a war zone, and I was done being a casualty. To understand why a slap in a bedroom felt less like a punishment and more like a declaration of war, you have to understand the geography of the battlefield. This war did not start this morning. It did not start when I lost my job at Northline Data Systems. It started nearly 2 decades ago, with a blueberry crumble and a smile that did not quite reach the eyes. I was 12 when Denise first walked into our kitchen. My mother had been gone for 2 years, and the house still felt like a lung trying to breathe with a cracked rib. We functioned, my father and I, but it was painful. Then came Denise. She was a friend of a friend from the church choir, and she arrived bearing warm baked goods and an abundance of sympathy. At first, she was wonderful. That is the trap, isn't it? It is how the invasive species takes root. She brought light back into the living room. She made my father laugh, a sound I had not heard since the hospice nurses packed up their equipment. She bought me clothes that actually fit, replacing the oversized boys' t-shirts I'd been hiding in. For a grieving preteen girl desperate for a maternal figure, she was water in the desert. But the water was poisoned. It just took me a few years to taste the arsenic. The shift was subtle. It started when I was around 14 or 15. The honeymoon phase of the marriage was over, and Denise had firmly established herself as the lady of the house. The sweet comments began to curdle. I remember standing in front of the hallway mirror before school, wearing a pair of jeans I had saved up my allowance to buy. Denise walked by, a basket of laundry on her hip. She stopped, looked at my reflection, and tilted her head. "Oh, Lena," she said, her voice dripping with faux concern. "Are you sure those are the right cut for your shape? You are getting a little sturdy in the hips, just like your mother was. Poor thing never could lose that extra weight." It was a precision strike. In 2 sentences, she attacked my body image and insulted my dead mother. When I teared up, she rolled her eyes. "Don't be so sensitive. I'm just trying to help you not look foolish. Teenage boys are cruel, you know." That was her method. She never yelled when my father was home. She never raised a hand. It was always these small, sharp needles inserted into my self-esteem. If I got an A-, she would ask why it wasn't an A. If I got an A, she would wonder aloud if the class was for remedial students. She constantly compared me to the daughters of her friends, girls who were quieter, prettier, more godly. There were no other children in the house to diffuse her focus. It was just me. I was the sole target of her need to control and diminish. One afternoon, when I was 16, my grandmother Eleanor came over for Sunday dinner. I was in the kitchen, struggling to frost a cake Denise had demanded I make for the church bake sale. I was making a mess of it. "Honestly, Lena," Denise snapped, grabbing the spatula from my hand, "you are useless in the kitchen. Your mother clearly didn't teach you anything before she died. Go set the table before you ruin anything else." She didn't know Eleanor was standing in the doorway leading to the sunroom. I froze, shame burning my face, but before I could run, Grandma Eleanor stepped in. She didn't shout. She didn't cause a scene. She simply walked over to the table, picked up her purse, and looked at me. "Lena, help me with my rose bushes for a moment. Would you? The gardener is pruning them all wrong." We walked out into the backyard. The air was crisp, smelling of damp earth and mulch. We walked to the far corner of the garden, out of sight of the kitchen window. Grandma Eleanor stopped and turned to me. She reached into her purse and pulled out a white envelope. "Take this," she said. "Grandma, I don't need money," I mumbled, wiping a stray tear from my cheek. "It is not for candy," she said sternly. She took my hand and pressed the envelope into my palm. "It is for books. It is for your college fund. It is for whatever you need to get out of here." I looked at her, surprised by the steel in her voice. "She is a small woman, Lena," Grandma said, looking back toward the house where Denise was reigning over her kitchen. "I do not mean her height. I mean her soul. Her soul is the size of a thimble, and she is terrified of anyone who has an ocean inside them. That is why she picks at you. Do not let her make you believe you are small just so she can feel big." That conversation saved my life. I left for college at 18 on a partial scholarship to a state university 3 hours away. I worked 2 jobs to cover the rest, so I wouldn't have to ask my father, and by extension, Denise, for a dime. For the next decade, I kept my distance. I came home for Christmas and Thanksgiving, enduring the passive-aggressive comments about my city career and my liberal attitude, but I never stayed longer than 48 hours. My connection to home was Eleanor. We wrote letters, real, handwritten letters on stationery that smelled like her lavender soap. We spoke on the phone every Sunday afternoon, but in the last 6 months, the tone of her letters had changed. She started writing about the past, about the grocery store chains she and Grandpa built, about the mistakes she made trusting the wrong managers in the 80s, and increasingly, she wrote about cleaning house. "I am tired of the clutter. Lena," she wrote in a letter I received just 3 weeks before I was laid off. "Not just the old furniture in the attic. I mean the clutter in my life. I want to make sure everything is in its right place before I go to meet the Lord. I do not want my hard work to become a weapon for people who do not know the meaning of charity." At the time, I thought she was just being morbid, facing her own mortality. Now, lying in my childhood bed, staring at the ceiling fan, those words took on a different shape. Denise, of course, had a different narrative. Whenever I spoke to Dad, he would tell me how wonderful Denise was being with Grandma. "She is a saint," Dad would say, repeating the script. "She goes over there every day, organizes her pills, drives her to appointments. Eleanor would be lost without her." Denise paraded this martyrdom around New Grace Fellowship like a trophy. I had seen her Facebook posts, selfies with Grandma, captioned with hashtags like "Blessed to Serve" and "Family First." She was building a public case for why she deserved the inheritance. She was the caretaker. I was the absentee granddaughter. The last time I visited, right before I lost my job, the cracks in Denise's performance were visible, if you knew where to look. I had driven down for the weekend. Denise was sugary sweet in front of the neighbors, but the moment the front door closed, the smile dropped. "Why are you here?" she hissed as I carried my bag into the hall. "To see my grandmother," I said. "She is resting. Do not go in there and get her riled up. She has been confused lately, mixing up names. I just got her settled." I ignored her and went to Grandma's room anyway. Eleanor wasn't confused. She was tired, yes, but her eyes were sharp. But later that night, after Denise thought I had gone to bed, I heard her in the kitchen with my father. "The girl is a distraction, Mark," Denise was saying. "Eleanor was ready to sign the updated power of attorney yesterday, and then Lena called, and she got all sentimental and put the pen down. You need to tell your daughter to back off. She is complicating the estate planning." That night, unable to sleep, I went down to make tea. I found Grandma Eleanor sitting at the kitchen table in the dark. She was just sitting there, her hands wrapped around a mug of hot water. "Grandma?" I whispered. She looked up. "Come here, Lena." I sat opposite her. She reached out and took my hand. Her skin was paper thin, blue veins mapping the geography of her age. "If you had to speak," she asked, her voice barely a whisper, "if you had a microphone and a whole room of people listening, Would you have the courage to tell the truth, even if it hurt people you were supposed to protect? I frowned, confused. What do you mean? What kind of truth? The kind that burns the field to save the soil, she said cryptically. Then she sighed and patted my hand. Never mind. An old woman's ramblings. Go to bed, dear. I didn't understand it then. I thought it was the medication talking, or maybe the early onset of the dementia Denise kept insisting she had. But now? Now, with the memory of Denise's slap still burning on my face, and the demand to sign a waiver of rights, the pieces were clicking together like the tumblers of a lock. Why was Denise so desperate for me to sign this today? Why before church? Because something was going to happen. And then, a specific memory hit me, a flash of a moment from that same visit 2 months ago. We were in Grandma's study. A man had been there earlier, not the family lawyer we had used for years, old Mr. Henderson, but a younger man. Grandma had introduced him simply as a consultant. After he left, Grandma had pushed a stack of papers toward me. "Lena, honey, my eyes are tired," she had said. "These are just updates for the bank accounts, beneficiary confirmations so the government doesn't take half of it in taxes. Can you sign here as a witness? And here as the secondary contact?" I hadn't read them. God help me. I hadn't read them. I trusted her implicitly. I just flipped to the sticker flags and signed my name. Lena Hartley. Lena Hartley. But I remembered the letterhead on the folder. It was thick, cream-colored paper. The logo was embossed in navy blue. Harris & Lowry Legal Group. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. Harris & Lowry, that wasn't a local firm. That sounded like a city firm, a high-end firm. I grabbed my laptop from the nightstand. It was 4 a.m, 2 hours before Denise would bang on my door. But I couldn't sleep. I opened my email and searched for the name. Nothing in the inbox. I checked the spam folder. Nothing. Then I checked my archived folder. There it was, an automated confirmation email from admin@harrislowry.com, dated 2 months ago. The subject line was simply, "Receipt of countersigned documents. Hartley Trust Restructuring." Trust restructuring, not bank account updates, not beneficiary confirmation. I clicked the attachment. It was password protected. I tried my birthday. Nothing. I tried Grandma's birthday. Nothing. Then I paused. I typed in the name of the grocery store my grandfather had opened in 1948. Hartley Market, 1948. The file opened. It was hundreds of pages of legalese, but I scrolled frantically. I wasn't a lawyer, but I knew how to look for keywords. I saw my name. I saw my father's name. I saw Denise's name. And then I saw a section highlighted in a digital comment box, presumably by the lawyer. Clause 4A, the bad actor provision. In the event that any primary beneficiary attempts to coerce, intimidate, or unduly influence the grantor, Eleanor Hartley, or any other beneficiary, they shall forfeit all rights to the estate. I scrolled further. There was an email thread attached at the bottom of the PDF, a conversation between Grandma Eleanor and a lawyer named Lucas Harris. Eleanor: "I want to make sure she is safe. Lucas, they think I am senile. They think I don't see how they treat her. I need this trust to be a shield, but I also need it to be a test. If they leave her alone, they get their share. If they try to cut her out..." Lucas: "Then the trap snaps shut." Eleanor: "But are you sure you want to do this publicly? The donor day at the church is a high-risk venue." Eleanor: "It is the only place they cannot hide. They use the church to polish their lies. I will use it to shine the light. Just make sure Lena is there. And tell her not to let anyone take the house she hasn't stepped into yet." I stared at the screen, the blue light illuminating my face in the dark room. Grandma wasn't confused. She wasn't a victim. She was a general conducting a stealth operation from her knitting chair. Denise didn't know about this trust. That was why she was trying to get me to sign the waiver this morning. The waiver I had in my room, the one Denise had drafted, was a crude, homemade legal attempt to bypass a will she thought existed. She had no idea that the real power lay in a trust that had already been executed 2 months ago, with my signature on it as a witness and beneficiary. By trying to force me to sign her paper, by slapping me, Denise had just walked right into the bad actor trap. But Grandma needed me there. She needed me to stand my ground. Don't let anyone take the house you haven't stepped into yet. I closed the laptop. The fear that had been gripping my stomach since I moved back began to dissolve, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I wasn't just going to church to pray. I was going to church to witness an execution. Denise thought she was the predator. She didn't realize she was the bait. I looked at the clock, 5:55. In 5 minutes, Denise would be at my door. In 5 minutes, the shouting would start. Let her shout, I thought, standing up and walking to the mirror. Let her think she has won. Because I knew something she didn't. I knew that the little girl she bullied for 15 years was about to hand her a shovel so she could dig her own grave. I took a deep breath, smoothed my hair, and waited for the knock. The lock on my bedroom door clicked shut, a small metal sound that felt like the dropping of a castle gate. My cheek was still throbbing, a dull, rhythmic ache that pulsed in time with my heartbeat. But the tears I had held back earlier were gone. They had evaporated, replaced by a cold, sterile clarity. This was a feeling I knew well. It was the same sensation I used to get at Northline Data Systems, when I stared at a spreadsheet full of chaotic numbers and realized, suddenly, that there was a pattern hidden in the noise. I sat down at my desk, pushing aside the clutter of makeup and tissues to make room for my laptop. The screen flickered to life, casting a pale blue glow across the room. My hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from adrenaline. Denise thought she had ended the conversation with violence. She thought she had asserted her dominance. But all she had done was provide the final variable in an equation I'd been trying to solve for weeks. I opened my email client. The search bar blinked. Waiting. I typed in 3 words: Harris and Lowry. The search results populated instantly. Most of them were the standard automated confirmations I had ignored or skimmed over in the past few months. Notifications about updated privacy policies, confirmation of receipt for documents I had countersigned during my last visit, but there was one file, sent as an attachment to an email from my grandmother's personal account 3 months ago, that I had never actually opened. The subject line was innocuous: for your files, just in case. At the time, I had assumed it was medical directives or insurance information. I clicked on it now. The document was a PDF scan, slightly crooked, as if Eleanor had placed the papers on the scanner herself. The title at the top of the first page was bold and capitalized: The Eleanor Hartley Revocable Living Trust, amended and restated. I leaned in, my eyes scanning the legalese. I was not a lawyer, but I had spent years reading software contracts and user agreements. I knew how to parse syntax. I knew how to find the loopholes and the hooks. The first few pages were standard: definitions of assets, the house on Maple Avenue, the investment portfolio managed by a firm in Chicago, the savings accounts. It was substantial, more than I had realized, but it was just numbers. Then I reached Article 4, distribution of trust assets. My breath hitched. There was no mention of Mark Hartley or Denise Hartley as primary trustees. Their names appeared, but only in a section regarding modest monthly stipends contingent on good conduct. The control of the estate, the voting rights for the shares, the deed to the house, the authority to distribute charitable funds, was assigned to a single primary beneficiary: Lena Elizabeth Hartley. I read it again, then a third time. But there was an asterisk. A clause followed the designation, written in dense, specific language that did not sound like boilerplate text. It sounded like Eleanor. Clause 7b. The condition of voice. The primary beneficiary shall assume full trusteeship only upon the demonstration of independent moral agency. Specifically, the beneficiary must demonstrate, in the presence of the congregation of New Grace Fellowship or a similar public forum, the willingness to prioritize truth over familial peacekeeping, should the beneficiary remain silent in the face of documented falsehoods regarding the grantor's character or intentions. The trust shall dissolve, and assets shall be donated entirely to the State of Ohio Veterans Fund. I sat back, the chair creaking under me. My grandmother was not just leaving me money. She was leaving me a test. She knew. She knew everything. She knew Denise bullied me into silence. She knew my father hid behind his "keep the peace" mantra, and she had designed a legal instrument that essentially said, "You can have the resources to save yourself, but only if you stop letting them trample you first." I minimized the PDF and opened another window, my grandmother's email folder, which she had granted me access to years ago, in case I forget my password. She had said, I searched for any correspondence with the law firm. I found a draft in her sent folder, dated 2 weeks ago. It was addressed to Lucas Harris, the senior partner. Dear Lucas, I am tired of the lies. I am tired of sitting in the front pew and listening to Reverend Allen praise my son and his wife for their sacrifice, while I pay for the very roof over their heads. They are planning something for Donor Day. I can feel it. Denise has been hovering like a vulture, asking about the old will. She does not know about the trust. She thinks if she can get me declared incompetent, or get Lena to sign a waiver, she can revert everything to the state laws of inheritance. I do not want to read a speech someone else wrote for me this Sunday. When I take the microphone, I want to look them in the eye, and I want to see if my granddaughter is finally ready to look back. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Donor Day. I glanced at the calendar on my wall. Today was the annual Donor Appreciation Service at New Grace Fellowship. It was the day the church publicly thanked its biggest benefactors. The pieces slammed together. Denise's urgency this morning, the frantic pounding on my door at 6 a.m, the blue folder she was trying to force me to sign. Denise did not know the trust existed, or if she suspected it, she didn't know the terms. She was operating on the assumption that the old will, the one that likely split things evenly or gave control to my father, was still the governing document. But she was terrified that Eleanor might announce something different today. The family agreement Denise had tried to bully me into signing wasn't just a power trip. It was a preemptive strike. If I signed a document stating I had no interest in the estate and acknowledged Mark and Denise as the rightful stewards before the service started, then whatever Eleanor said on the microphone could be dismissed. They could wave the paper and say, "Look, even Lena agrees. Poor Eleanor is just confused. We have it in writing." Denise was trying to neutralize me before the game even started. And by slapping me, by threatening me, she had unknowingly handed me the ammunition to destroy her. I looked at the clock. 6:45. We had to leave in 45 minutes. I felt a shift happen inside me. The lingering sting on my cheek stopped feeling like a wound and started feeling like fuel. The data analyst part of my brain took over. The part that didn't feel, didn't cry, didn't panic. The part that organized information and executed a strategy. I needed hard copies. I pulled my portable printer out from under the bed. It was old and slow, but it worked. I connected it to the laptop and hit print on the trust agreement. Then I printed the email from Eleanor to Lucas Harris. Then I printed the calendar entry for Donor Day from the church website, highlighting the agenda item, Legacy Announcement, Eleanor Hartley. While the printer whirred and scratched, spitting out page after page, I started organizing. I grabbed a plain manila envelope. I didn't want the blue legal folder Denise had used. That was her game. I needed my own. I sorted the documents, trust agreement on the bottom, emails on top, but something was missing. I needed confirmation that the trust was still active, that nothing had been changed in the last 48 hours while I was asleep. I opened a new email to Lucas, harris@harrislowry.com. Subject, urgent. Hartley Trust status, inquiry. Dear Mr. Harris, my name is Lena Hartley. I am writing regarding my grandmother, Eleanor Hartley. I have reason to believe that an attempt will be made today to coerce signatures regarding her estate prior to the church service. Please confirm by reply to this email immediately. Has there been any legal alteration to the trust in the last 6 months? Does Eleanor Hartley retain full capacity in the eyes of your firm? I am heading to New Grace Fellowship now. I will be recording all interactions. Sincerely, Lena. I hit send. It was a long shot that a lawyer would answer email at 7 on a Sunday morning, but I had to try. Then, I remembered the recordings. I pushed my chair back and went to the dresser. The bottom drawer was filled with old socks and memorabilia from high school, yearbooks, ticket stubs, and a small, battered tin box. I opened the box. Inside, nestled among friendship bracelets, was a silver USB drive. I had started recording things years ago, when I was 22 and home for a disastrous Thanksgiving. It had been an impulsive decision back then, a way to prove to myself that I wasn't crazy, that Denise really did say those things when Dad wasn't in the room. I had transferred the files from my old phones to this drive. Years of snippets. Denise calling me worthless. Denise talking about how much money Grandma had wasted on charity. Denise laughing about how easy it was to manipulate the church elders. And now, I had the recording from this morning. The slap, the threat, the explicit blackmail. If you do not sign, I will tell them you are a thief. I plugged my phone into the laptop and transferred the audio file from this morning. I named it simply, Sunday Morning Assault, MP3. I dragged it onto the USB drive along with the others. I held the small silver stick in my hand. It was so light, yet it carried the weight of a nuclear bomb. If I actually played this, it would not just ruin breakfast. It would incinerate the reputation Denise had spent 15 years cultivating. It would humiliate my father. It would turn the perfect Christian family into a pariah. Do you have the courage to prioritize truth over peacekeeping? Grandma's words from the trust document echoed in my head. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. I looked tired. I looked pale. But for the first time in years, I didn't look like a victim. I looked like a witness preparing for the stand. I made a decision then. I would not sign the papers. I would not scream at Denise in the hallway. I would not give her the satisfaction of a fight she could control. I would give her silence. I would let her think she had won. Let her think I was cowed and broken, right up until the moment it mattered. I put the USB drive in the zippered pocket of my purse. I put the folded manila envelope in the main compartment, hidden behind my Bible. I went to the closet and pulled out a dress. It was black, high-necked, severe. It was not the pastel floral Denise preferred I wear. It was the kind of dress you wore to a funeral or a boardroom execution. I quickly applied a fresh layer of makeup over the red mark on my cheek. It was completely invisible now, buried under layers of beige and powder, but I knew it was there. I could feel the heat of it radiating through the cosmetics. I checked my phone. No reply from the lawyer yet. That was fine. I had enough. I walked to the door and unlocked it. The house was quiet again. The shouting over. I could hear the shower running in the master bathroom down the hall. Denise was washing away the sweat of her rage, preparing to put on her Sunday mask. I stepped out into the hallway. The floorboards creaked under my feet, but I didn't cringe this time. I walked straight to the stairs, my head high, my purse heavy on my shoulder. I was ready. I was going to church, and I was bringing the truth with me, whether they were ready to hear it or not. The interior of my father's silver SUV smelled like lemon air freshener and stale tension. It was a 15-minute drive from our house on Elm Street to New Grace Fellowship Church, a route I had traveled 1,000 times in my life. Usually, I spent this time staring out the window, counting the telephone poles and wishing I was anywhere else. Today, however, the silence inside the car felt heavy, pressurized, like the air before a tornado touches down. I sat in the back seat, the leather cold against my legs through the thin fabric of my black dress. My purse was clutched tight in my lap, the hard edge of the USB drive pressing against my thigh through the fabric. In the front seat, Denise was adjusting the rearview mirror, checking her lipstick for the third time. She looked perfect. Her blonde hair was sprayed into an immovable helmet of piety. Her navy suit was crisp, and her pearls were centered, but I could see her eyes in the reflection. They were darting back and forth, agitated, calculating. "Mark," she whispered, leaning toward my father as he drove. She kept her voice low, the way one might speak around a sleeping child or a dangerous animal, but the acoustics of the car amplified everything. You need to be prepared if she tries to make a scene. She won't make a scene, Denise, Dad said, his hands gripping the steering wheel at 10 and 2. He sounded exhausted. She promised to behave. Promises from addicts and the mentally unstable mean nothing, Denise hissed. I flinched. Addicts? That was a new one. She was escalating the narrative. She is not an addict, Dad said weakly. She is addicted to drama. Mark, look at her. Denise jerked her head slightly toward the back seat, though she didn't turn around. She comes back here, broke, angry, refusing to sign a simple family agreement meant to protect your mother. Why? Because she wants to create chaos. I am telling you. I saw that look in her eye this morning. She is manic. I stared out the window at the passing suburban lawns of Brookside. Manic, unstable, dangerous. She was planting the seeds. She was ensuring that if I opened my mouth later, anything I said would be filtered through the lens of my alleged insanity. It was brilliant, in a sickly, Machiavellian way. By the time we reached the parking lot, my father would be so terrified of my instability that he would back Denise up just to keep the volume down. I carefully slid my phone out of my purse, keeping it below the window line so Denise couldn't see. I had 1 bar of signal. A notification popped up. It was an email. My heart jumped. It was the reply from Harris and Lowry. But it wasn't a personal note from Lucas Harris. It was an automated system response. But the text was specific, customized for this exact date range. Regarding the estate of Eleanor Hartley, please be advised that per the client's strict instruction, effective immediately, all inquiries regarding the Hartley Trust must be confirmed verbally with Ms. Hartley in person, no electronic amendments, third-party waivers, or proxy signatures will be accepted or recognized by this firm until after the Donor Day event concludes at 12 p.m. today. I read it twice, the breath catching in my throat. No third-party waivers. That meant the papers Denise had tried to force me to sign this morning, the ones that earned me a slap across the face, were useless. Even if I had signed them, the lawyers wouldn't have accepted them without Grandma's verbal confirmation. But the second part of the message was what made my blood run cold and hot at the same time. Until after the Donor Day event concludes, Grandma Eleanor had locked down her own estate. She had deliberately created a bottleneck where the only way to change anything, the only way to claim anything, was to go through her in public today. I looked up at the back of Denise's head. She didn't know. She thought she was the chess master, moving pieces around a board she controlled. She didn't realize the board itself had been rigged by an 80-year-old woman who supposedly couldn't remember what year it was. I closed my eyes and pictured Grandma, for the last few years, whenever I thought of her. I saw a frail woman leaning heavily on a cane, her hands shaking as she held a teacup. I saw the woman Denise described, confused, tired, needing protection, but now, a new image was superimposing itself over that one. I saw the woman who had negotiated with union bosses in the 1980s. I saw the woman who built a business from a roadside fruit stand. The frailty. Was it real, or was it camouflage? "We are here," Dad said, turning the SUV into the sprawling asphalt lot of New Grace Fellowship. The church was a massive brick structure with a white steeple that pierced the blue Ohio sky. It was the kind of place that prided itself on community, on potlucks, on being the moral compass of the town. As we parked, I saw the community in action. Cars were pulling in, families spilling out in their Sunday best. Denise opened her door before the engine had even fully stopped. She stepped out, and the transformation was instantaneous. Her shoulders relaxed, her smile brightened to a blinding wattage, and she waved to a woman 3 cars down. "Oh, hello, Sarah, lovely hat," she called out, her voice musical. I stepped out of the back seat. The air was cool, but the sun was bright. I felt exposed. My black dress felt too severe among the sea of pastels and floral prints. Denise, a woman named Martha, the head of the prayer circle, bustled over. She ignored me completely and went straight for my stepmother, grasping her hands. "We are so excited for the service. Reverend Allen says there is a special announcement about the building fund." "Oh, we are just humbled to be able to give," Denise said, bowing her head modestly. "Mark and I feel very blessed to steward Eleanor's legacy. It is a heavy burden, caring for her and the finances, but the Lord gives us strength." "You are a saint, truly," Martha gushed. Then she looked past Denise and saw me. Her smile faltered, turning into a tight, pitying line. "Hello, Lena. It is good to see you back in church. We have been praying for your situation." My situation? Unemployment? Singleness? Or the vague instability Denise had been whispering about? "Thank you, Martha," I said, keeping my face neutral. "I am doing just fine." "She is working through some things," Denise interjected quickly, stepping in front of me like a human shield. "We are just taking it one day at a time. Come on, Mark, we should find the Reverend." She grabbed my father's arm and marched toward the double oak doors of the sanctuary. I followed a few paces behind, like a shadow they couldn't shake. Inside the lobby, the air was thick with perfume and organ music. Reverend Allen was standing near the greeters, shaking hands. He was a tall man with silver hair and a smile that felt rehearsed. When he saw Denise, his face lit up. "The Hartley family," he boomed. "The pillars of our church." Denise practically floated over to him. She pulled him aside, leaning in close. I stayed back near the tract rack, pretending to adjust my shoe strap, but I watched. I saw Denise whisper something urgent in his ear. I saw her gesture vaguely in my direction. I saw the Reverend's eyes flicker toward me. It wasn't a look of pastoral welcome, it was a look of assessment. He looked at me like I was a security risk. He nodded solely to Denise, patted her shoulder reassuringly, and then turned back to the crowd. She had gotten to him. She had primed the pump. If I tried to speak later, the microphone would probably be cut before I got 2 words out. I felt a wave of nausea. Maybe I couldn't do this. Maybe I was out of my league. These people had decades of social capital. I had a USB drive and a bruised cheek covered in concealer. "Excuse me." The voice came from my left. I turned, startled. Standing there was a man I didn't recognize. He was in his late 40s, wearing a gray suit that was well-tailored but lacked the flashy ostentatiousness of the Sunday crowd. He had wire-rimmed glasses and a calm, serious face. He wasn't holding a Bible. He was holding a leather portfolio. "Lena Hartley?" he asked softly. "Yes." I took a step back, wary. "Do I know you?" "Not officially," he said. He glanced around to make sure no one was listening. The lobby was loud with chatter, giving us a bubble of privacy. "My name is Lucas. I am a friend of your grandmother's, a professional friend." "Lucas Harris." My breath caught. "You are the lawyer." He didn't confirm or deny it, just gave a barely perceptible nod. "Eleanor asked me to look out for you this morning. She thought you might feel outnumbered." "You could say that," I whispered, glancing at where Denise was still holding court with the Reverend. "Is she here yet?" "She is in the vestry, resting before the service," Lucas said. He stepped closer, lowering his voice further. "She wanted me to give you a message. She said, 'I do not need a spokesperson today. I need a witness. Don't leave, and do not stay silent if they try to erase you.'" "They are already erasing me," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Denise has already told the pastor I am crazy. She tried to make me sign a waiver this morning." Lucas's eyes sharpened behind his glasses. "A waiver? Did you sign it?" "No, I refused." "Good." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a slim white envelope. It wasn't sealed. "She also wanted you to have this. It is a copy of Clause 4A from the Act of Trust. Read it, memorize it. It is your armor." I took the envelope, my fingers brushing against the cool paper. "What does it say?" "It says that the beneficiary's standing is protected against coercion," Lucas said, his gaze intense. "It specifically states that if any family member uses force, intimidation, or deceit to compel you to surrender your rights, they are immediately disqualified from receiving any portion of the estate. 0, cut off." I stared at him. The world seemed to slow down. "Force," I repeated. Does physical force count? Lucas looked at my face. He studied the left side of my cheek. I had covered the mark well, but perhaps he saw the tension in my jaw, or the way I was holding myself, or maybe he just knew what kind of people Denise and Mark were. Yes, he said simply. Physical force counts. Intimidation counts. Public slander counts. I felt a sudden, fierce rush of adrenaline, the slap, the recording on the USB drive in my pocket. Denise hadn't just assaulted me. She had unknowingly triggered a legal trapdoor that would drop her straight into poverty. If I played that recording, if I proved she hit me to make me sign that paper, she wouldn't just lose the argument, she would lose the house, the money, the status, everything. But only if I spoke up. Only if I didn't let her bury the truth under a pile of hymns and fake prayers. Thank you, I whispered. I will be sitting in the third row on the left, Lucas said. I am here to ensure the proceedings follow the legal requirements of the trust. But the rest is up to you and Eleanor. He nodded once and slipped away into the crowd, blending in so perfectly he seemed to vanish. I looked down at the envelope in my hand. I didn't open it. I didn't need to read the words right now. I believed him. The sanctuary doors opened wider, and the organ music swelled. Signaling the start of the service, the crowd began to flow inward, a river of polite smiles and hidden agendas. Usually, I sat in the back row, the very back, in the corner, where I could slip out during the final hymn and avoid talking to anyone. That was my spot. The spot for the black sheep. The spot for the unstable daughter. I saw Denise and Dad walking down the center aisle. They were heading for the second row, the prime real estate directly behind the reserved seating for the guests of honor. Denise was waving to people as she went, acting like she was walking a red carpet. I gripped my purse. I thought about the slap. I thought about the years of subtle digs, the way she made me feel like a guest in my own life. I thought about Grandma Eleanor, sitting in the vestry, waiting to see if I was brave enough to be her granddaughter. Don't let anyone take the house you haven't stepped into yet. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of lilies and floor wax. I stepped into the aisle. I did not walk to the back. I walked forward. My heels clicked rhythmically on the carpet runner. I passed the back rows. I passed the middle rows where the casual attendees sat. I kept walking. I saw Denise turn her head as I approached. Her eyes widened. She made a small, sharp gesture with her hand, a silent command. Go back. Go away. I looked right at her. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just looked her dead in the eye. And then I walked past her. I sat down in the front row, directly across the aisle from where my grandmother would be seated. The pew was hard and wooden. I was alone in it. I could feel the eyes of the entire congregation boring into my back. I could hear the sudden, sharp intake of breath from Denise behind me. Let them stare. Let them whisper. I was done hiding in the dark. If they wanted a show, they were about to get one. But it wasn't going to be the story Denise had written. I crossed my legs, placed my purse on my lap with the envelope on top, and waited for the service to begin. The organ music at New Grace Fellowship was not just a sound. It was a physical force. As the service began, the deep, vibrating notes of the opening hymn seemed to shake the floorboards beneath my feet, rattling my bones. To everyone else, it was the comforting, familiar sound of Sunday morning worship. To me, it sounded like the soundtrack to an execution. I just wasn't sure yet whose head was on the block. I sat in the front row on the left side, a position so conspicuous it felt like standing naked under a spotlight. This pew was usually reserved for the families of deacons or visiting missionaries. By claiming it, I had disrupted the unspoken geography of the church. I could feel the heat of 100 stares burning into the back of my black dress. They were wondering why the prodigal daughter, the one Denise whispered about during coffee hour, was sitting so close to the altar. Across the aisle, in the center section, sat the perfect family. I didn't turn my head, but I could see them in my peripheral vision. Denise sat in the second row, her posture rigid and upright. She had linked her arm through my father's, clutching his bicep with a grip that looked affectionate, but was likely cutting off his circulation. Dad looked gray, his eyes fixed on the hymnal in front of him as if he were trying to disappear into the pages. They looked like a portrait of marital solidarity, a fortress built to withstand the instability of the stepdaughter sitting 10 feet away. Then, the side door near the choir loft opened. A hush fell over the front rows. 2 ushers, young men in ill-fitting suits, stepped forward to assist. Between them walked my grandmother, Eleanor Hartley. She was wearing a cream-colored suit that I recognized from photographs of her receiving the Chamber of Commerce Award 20 years ago. It was old-fashioned but elegant, made of a heavy silk that caught the light. She moved slowly, leaning heavily on her cane with her right hand, her left arm resting on the elbow of an usher. Her silver hair was pulled back in a tight bun, revealing the sharp, aristocratic line of her jaw. To the congregation, she looked frail, a beloved matriarch in the twilight of her years, entering the sanctuary she had helped build with her checkbook. I heard a few sympathetic murmurs ripple through the crowd, the sound of people pitying the wealthy old woman whose mind was supposedly slipping away. Denise leaned forward from the second row, her face a mask of concern, making a show of watching Eleanor's every step. She was performing the role of the anxious caretaker, signaling to everyone that she was the only thing keeping Eleanor upright. But as Grandma Eleanor passed my pew, she didn't look at Denise. She didn't look at the altar. She turned her head slightly and looked directly at me. Her eyes were clear, cold, alert. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was not a greeting. It was a confirmation. The game was on. She settled into the designated seat in the front row on the right, directly opposite me. The usher adjusted the cushion behind her back. She waved him away with a flick of her wrist that was all iron. No frailty. Reverend Allen took the pulpit. He adjusted the microphone, beaming out at the sea of faces. "Welcome, family," he boomed. "What a blessed morning it is. Today is a special day. Today is Donor Day, where we honor those whose generosity keeps the lights of God's house burning bright." He paused, his eyes sweeping the room before landing briefly on Denise, then Eleanor, and finally skimming over me with a frown. "But before we get to the celebration," he continued, his voice dropping to a somber, pastoral register, "we must speak on the scripture, and today, the Lord laid a message on my heart about family, about the sacred bond of the home, about sacrifice." I stiffened. I knew what was coming. Denise had been whispering in his ear for 20 minutes before the service. "The Bible tells us to honor our father and mother," Reverend Allen said, gripping the sides of the pulpit. "But what does that honor look like? It looks like submission. It looks like silence. It looks like putting the needs of the family unit above our own selfish desires." He was looking right at me. I was sure of it. "We live in a world," he preached, his voice rising in cadence, "where young people feel entitled. They go out into the world. They chase their careers. They chase their worldly ambitions. And when they fail, when the world chews them up, they come running back home. But do they come back with humility? Do they come back with a servant's heart? Or do they come back demanding, sowing discord, disrupting the peace of the righteous?" My stomach twisted. It was a direct assassination of my character, delivered as a sermon. Denise had fed him every bullet point. I was the entitled failure. I was the disruptor. "True love is sacrifice," Allen thundered. "It is the daughter-in-law who cares for the aging mother without complaint. It is the parents who open their doors to the wayward child despite the disruption. We must pray for those who bring strife into the home. We must pray that they learn the value of quiet obedience." "Amen," someone said from the back. "Amen," Denise whispered loudly enough for the first 3 rows to hear. I gripped the edge of the pew until my knuckles turned white. The envelope from Lucas Harris sat on my lap, a thin paper shield against this barrage of spiritual abuse. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to scream that I was the one paying the utility bills this month. I wanted to scream that the righteous woman behind me had slapped me across the face 3 hours ago. But I remembered Lucas's words. "Do not leave. Do not stay silent if they try to erase you." I forced myself to breathe. In, out. I kept my face perfectly still, a mask of stone. I would not give them the satisfaction of a tear. The sermon dragged on for another 30 minutes, a relentless drumbeat of guilt and obligation. Finally, the organ swelled again, signaling the transition to the special program. Reverend Allen wiped his brow with a handkerchief and smiled, shifting gears from fire and brimstone to benevolent fundraiser. "And now," he said, "we come to the moment where we honor our benefactors. For 40 years, the Hartley family has been the bedrock of New Grace, and while our beloved Eleanor is here with us today," he gestured to Grandma, who stared back at him impassively, "we know that in recent years, the mantle of stewardship has fallen on the shoulders of the next generation." He extended a hand toward the second row. "I would like to invite Denise Hartley up to the podium, a woman who exemplifies the sacrifice we just spoke of, a woman who has dedicated her life to caring for our dear Eleanor and ensuring that this church continues to thrive." Denise stood up, she smoothed her skirt, patted my father's hand one last time, and walked to the stairs of the chancel. She moved with a practiced humility, head bowed slightly, as if the attention were a burden she was reluctantly accepting. She stepped up to the pulpit. Reverend Allen adjusted the microphone down for her. "Thank you, Reverend," she said, her voice trembling with engineered emotion. I am just overwhelmed." She looked out at the congregation. She had them in the palm of her hand. "You know," she began, "people see the Hartley name on the building, and they think about money, but they do not see the reality. They do not see the 4 a.m. wake-up calls when Mother is confused and needs medication. They do not see the appointments, the paperwork, the heavy lifting of caring for a legacy." She paused, wiping a non-existent tear from her eye. "I had a career once," she said softly. "I had dreams, but God called me to a higher purpose. He called me to protect this family, to protect Eleanor." She turned and smiled at Grandma. Grandma did not smile back. Grandma gripped the head of her cane with both hands. Her eyes narrowed. "It is not easy," Denise continued, her voice hardening just a fraction. Especially when there are spiritual attacks from within. It breaks a mother's heart when she sees division in the home, when she sees greed taking root where love should be." "Here it comes," I thought, the kill shot. "We have had some challenges recently," Denise confided to the room, her gaze flickering briefly, unmistakably, to the back of my head. "We have had people come back into our lives who perhaps do not understand the sacrifice required to maintain this legacy. People who look at an elderly woman and see a bank account, not a soul to be nurtured. People who create paperwork and confusion just to hurt the ones who fed them." The congregation rippled with whispers, heads turned. I could feel the judgment radiating from the pews behind me like heat from a furnace. The stepdaughter, the failure, the gold digger. "But I want you to know," Denise said, her voice soaring now, full of righteous conviction, "that Mark and I will never let that happen. We have taken steps, legal steps, spiritual steps, to ensure that Eleanor's wishes are honored, to ensure that her resources go to God's kingdom, not to personal ambitions." She gripped the podium, leaning forward. "So today, on behalf of Eleanor, who trusts us to speak for her when she cannot find the words herself, I am proud to announce a pledge. We are committing the entirety of the Hartley Family Reserve Fund to the new building project." There was a collective gasp. That was hundreds of thousands of dollars. Money that, according to the trust document in my lap, Denise had absolutely no authority to pledge. "We do this," Denise said, shouting over the beginning of applause, "because we believe in justice. We believe in protecting the vulnerable from the wolves. We do this for God." "Amen," shouted the Reverend. Denise beamed, basking in the adoration. She opened her mouth to deliver her final, rehearsed line, something about faith and family. "Denise?" The voice was not loud, but it cut through the sanctuary air like a serrated knife. It was raspy, dry, and undeniable. The applause died instantly. Denise froze. Her mouth was still open, but no sound came out. "Denise," the voice said again, louder this time. "Give me the microphone." Slowly, every head in the church turned toward the front row. Grandma Eleanor was standing up. She was not trembling. She was not being helped by an usher. She had planted her cane firmly on the burgundy carpet and pushed herself upright. She stood tall, her spine straight, her chin lifted. Denise stood at the pulpit, paralyzed. She looked at Reverend Allen, panic flashing in her eyes. "Reverend," she whispered, She is having an episode. We should—" "I am not having an episode, Denise," Eleanor said. Her voice projected clearly, even without amplification. Decades of shouting orders in grocery warehouses had given her a diaphragm of steel. "I am having a moment of clarity. Now, bring me that microphone, or do I have to walk up there and take it from you?" The silence in the church was absolute. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. You could hear the rustle of a hymnal page turning in the balcony. Reverend Allen looked between the two women. He looked at Denise, his devoted donor, who was now pale and sweating. Then he looked at Eleanor, the name on the building, the woman who had signed the checks for 40 years. He was a man who knew where the power really lay. He stepped toward Denise. "Sister Denise," he said quietly, Perhaps we should let Mother speak." "She doesn't know what she is saying," Denise hissed at him, forgetting to cover the mic. Her voice boomed through the speakers, shrill and desperate. "She is confused. We signed the papers." "I did not sign anything," Eleanor said. She stepped out into the aisle. "And neither did my granddaughter." At the mention of me, Denise flinched as if she had been struck. Eleanor stood in the center of the aisle, halfway between me and the pulpit. She held out her hand. It was a command. "Bring it to me," she said. Reverend Allen gently took the microphone from Denise's gripping fingers. Denise looked like she wanted to fight him for it, but the social pressure of 300 people watching pinned her in place. She let go. The Reverend walked down the steps. He handed the wireless microphone to Eleanor. "Thank you, Reverend," Eleanor said. Her hand, liver-spotted and wrinkled, wrapped around the black plastic handle. She didn't shake. She adjusted her grip, testing the weight of it. Denise stood stranded on the platform, exposed, stripped of her narrative. Mark was still sitting in the pew, his head in his hands, hiding. Eleanor turned. She didn't look at the crowd yet. She turned slowly, pivoting on her cane, until she was facing the front row on the left. She looked at me. Her face was stern, but her eyes were blazing. It was the same look she used to give me when I fell off my bike as a kid. A look that said, "Get up. It's time to ride." She held my gaze for 5 long seconds, creating a tether between us that excluded everyone else in the room. Then, she took a breath. She turned back to the congregation. She raised the microphone to her lips. The storm had arrived, and it was wearing a cream-colored suit. "I apologize," Eleanor said, her voice rasping through the speakers but steady as granite. "I apologize for allowing a lie to be spoken in the house of God. I stayed silent for too long because I wanted peace. But I see now that peace without truth is just rot painted over with white paint." The silence in the sanctuary was absolute. It was a vacuum, sucking the air out of the room. 300 people sat frozen in their pews. Denise stood a few feet away from Grandma, her hands hovering in the air as if she wanted to snatch the microphone back, but knew that doing so would look like assault. Eleanor did not look at Denise. She looked at the congregation. She looked at the people she had known for 40 years. "You all know the name on the building," Eleanor continued, gesturing vaguely toward the stained glass windows. "But you seem to have forgotten the woman who wrote the check. I did not inherit my money. My husband and I did not get a trust fund. We built Hartley Grocery from a roadside stand on Route 33. I stacked cans until my fingers bled. I negotiated leases with men who thought a woman's place was in the kitchen. I saved every nickel while others bought new cars." She took a breath, her chest rising and falling beneath the cream silk of her suit. "I have held on to that money not because I am greedy," she said, her eyes flashing, "but because I know the value of it. and because I know the character of the people waiting for me to die so they can spend it. A gasp rippled through the room. It was a sharp, collective intake of breath. "Let me be clear," Eleanor said, her voice hardening. "I have never, at any point, turned over the management of my assets to my son Mark or his wife Denise. I have never signed a power of attorney granting them control. I asked them to drive me to church because my eyesight is failing, not because my mind is—" Murmurs broke out now. She never signed? But Denise said. Denise's face was a study in terror. The carefully constructed mask of the long-suffering caregiver was cracking, revealing the panic beneath. She took a step toward Eleanor. "Mother, please, you are confused. The medication—" "Be quiet, Denise," Eleanor snapped. She didn't even turn her head. Then, Eleanor pivoted. She looked directly at me. "Lena," she said, "stand up." My legs felt like lead. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might bruise them. But I stood. I stood up in the front row, clutching my purse, my black dress stark against the burgundy upholstery. "Look at her," Eleanor commanded the room. "This is my granddaughter, Lena Elizabeth Hartley. She is the only person in this family who has never asked me for a single dime. Not when she went to college, not when she lost her mother, and not even 3 months ago, when she lost her job and had to move back into a house where she is treated like a servant." I felt the eyes of the church shift to me. The judgment was still there, but it was changing texture. It was becoming confused. Wait, she didn't ask for money? "She has been scrubbing floors and weeding gardens to pay for her room and board," Eleanor said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "While the people sitting in the second row drive cars, bought with the dividends from my stock portfolio." "That is enough!" Denise lunged forward. She couldn't help herself. The narrative was slipping away, and she was desperate to catch it. She reached for the microphone in Eleanor's hand. "Mother, stop this! You are making a scene. Reverend, she is having a breakdown." Eleanor didn't flinch. She simply pulled the microphone back, and with a surprising agility, raised her cane between herself and Denise. It wasn't a violent move, but it was a barrier. "I do not need a microphone to explain what you have been doing in the dark, Denise," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a dangerous growl that the mic picked up perfectly. "But since we are here, let us turn on the lights." She looked past Denise, scanning the third row. "Lucas," she called out, "please come here." Lucas Harris stood up. He adjusted his jacket, buttoning it with calm, professional precision. He walked to the center aisle and stood next to Eleanor. He looked like exactly what he was, a high-powered attorney who had wandered into a small-town drama and brought the rule of law with him. "This is Lucas Harris," Eleanor introduced him. "He is not a friend of the family. He is my attorney, and for the last 6 months, while my daughter-in-law was busy telling you all that I was senile, Lucas and I were drafting the Hartley Family Trust." Twist number 1. The room went dead silent again. "The trust is active," Eleanor declared. "It controls everything, the house, the accounts, the land, and as of 60 days ago, the sole primary beneficiary of that trust, the person who decides where the money goes when I'm gone, or if I become incapacitated, is not Mark. It is not Denise." She pointed a shaking finger at me. "It is Lena." Denise staggered back as if she had been physically shoved. Her hand went to her throat. Mark, sitting in the pew, finally looked up, his mouth hanging open in shock. "But there is a condition," Eleanor continued, and her voice turned icy. "A clause that I insisted on. Lucas read it." Lucas opened the leather portfolio he was holding. He didn't need to shout. The acoustics carried his calm, baritone voice to the rafters. Clause 4A, Section 2, the bad actor provision. Lucas read, "In the event that any family member attempts to use coercion, physical violence, intimidation, or deceit to force the beneficiary or the grantor to alter the estate plan, said family member shall be immediately and permanently disqualified from receiving any distribution from the trust. This includes monthly stipends, housing allowances, and charitable directives." Twist number 2. The trap snapped shut. I watched the color drain out of Denise's face. It didn't just fade. It vanished, leaving her skin the color of gray putty. She knew what she had done this morning. She knew about the slap. She knew about the threat to destroy my reputation. That is absurd, Denise stammered, her voice shrill and unamplified, but audible in the quiet room. Nobody has done that. We are a loving family. Eleanor turned on her then. She pivoted fully, leaning on her cane, looking at the woman who had bullied me for 15 years. Don't lie to me, Denise, Eleanor said. I am old, I am tired, but I am not blind, and I am certainly not deaf. She looked out at the congregation. This morning, Eleanor said, addressing the crowd, at 6 o'clock, my granddaughter was woken up by pounding on her door. She was presented with a document, a fake document, that would have stripped her of her rights, and when she refused to sign it, Eleanor paused. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a fierce, protective sorrow. When she refused to sign it, she was struck across the face. Gasps erupted, actual gasps. People put hands over their mouths. Heads whipped around to look at Denise, then at me, then back at Denise. The saintly caretaker image was dissolving in real time, replaced by something ugly and violent. Liar, Denise screamed. It was a guttural sound, stripped of all pretense. She pointed a shaking finger at Eleanor, then at me. That is a lie. She is making it up. Lena told you that, didn't she? She is a liar. She is mentally unstable. She hit herself. Who are you going to believe? Me, who has served this church for 20 years, or this failure? The accusation hung in the air. It was the classic defense of the abuser. Deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. And for a second, I saw doubt in some of the faces. Denise had built a lot of capital here. People wanted to believe the nice lady in the navy suit, not the horror story. Reverend Allen looked paralyzed. He stepped forward. Sisters, please, this is a serious accusation, unless there is proof. I have proof. I spoke for the first time. My voice was not loud, but it was steady. I reached into my purse. My hand was trembling, just a little, but I forced it to move. I pulled out my phone. I have a recording, I said. Denise froze. Her eyes locked onto the device in my hand. I recorded the conversation in my bedroom this morning, I said, projecting my voice to the back of the room. I have the threats. I have the demand to sign the papers, and I have the sound of the strike. Twist number 3. The temptation to press play was overwhelming. I could hold the phone up to the microphone. I could let the sound of Denise's cruelty blast through the speakers, shattering her reputation instantly. It would be visceral. It would be satisfying. But then I looked at Grandma Eleanor. She was watching me. She was waiting to see what kind of woman I was. Was I vengeful? Or was I just? I didn't press play. I walked forward. I walked up the 3 steps to the chancel, moving past Denise, who shrank away from me as if I were holding a grenade. I walked past my grandmother, giving her a brief, reassuring nod. I stopped in front of Lucas Harris. I do not want to turn this church into a circus, I said, loud enough for the first few rows to hear. And I do not want to play this for entertainment. This is a legal matter. I unlocked the phone and navigated to the file, Sunday Morning Assault, MP3. I handed the phone to Lucas. Mr. Harris, I said, as the trustee's attorney, can you please verify the content of this recording? Lucas took the phone. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a pair of wired earbuds. He plugged them in. The sanctuary held its breath. 300 people watched a man listen to a phone. It was the longest minute of my life. I watched Lucas's face. He was a professional. His expression remained neutral for the first few seconds. Then, his eyebrows shot up. He winced slightly, a tiny, involuntary reaction to the sound of the slap. His jaw tightened. He looked up from the phone, his eyes shifting to Denise with a look of profound professional disgust. He took the earbuds out. He looked at Reverend Allen, who was standing there sweating. Lucas nodded slowly. It was a grim, final nod. "It is all there, Reverend," Lucas said, his voice carrying the weight of a judge's gavel. "Coercion, extortion, and physical assault, it is unambiguous." The sound that filled the room wasn't a gasp this time. It was the sound of a dam breaking, the sound of a reputation collapsing, structurally and completely, into the dust. Denise swayed on her feet, her hand grasping the pulpit for support, but nobody moved to catch her. I turned to look at my grandmother. She was smiling. It was a small, sad smile, but it was the smile of a general who had just won the war without firing a single shot herself. Reverend Allen looked like a man standing on a trapdoor that had just been unlatched. He held a handkerchief in one hand and the pulpit with the other, his knuckles white against the dark wood. The sanctuary was so quiet that the hum of the overhead lights sounded like a roar. He looked at Lucas Harris, who was still holding my phone, the earbuds dangling around his neck like a stethoscope that had just detected a fatal heart condition. "Mr. Harris," the Reverend said, his voice lacking its usual boom, "you are an officer of the court. We are a community of faith here. We do not take accusations lightly. I have to ask you, for the record, is there ambiguity in what you just heard? Is there any chance this was just a heated family disagreement?" Lucas Harris did not hesitate. He did not look at the floor, and he did not look at the ceiling. He looked directly at the congregation, his face composed of the stone-cold neutrality that costs $500 an hour. "Reverend," Lucas said, his voice projecting clearly to the back of the room, "the law defines a heated disagreement as an argument. The law defines what I just heard as extortion. There is a clear demand for a signature on a legal document under the threat of reputational destruction, and regarding the physical aspect—" He paused, glancing briefly at the side of my face where the makeup hid the bruise. "There is the distinct sound of a strike," Lucas continued, "followed by an admission of the act. In the state of Ohio, striking a family member to compel a financial action is not a domestic dispute. It is assault with intent to defraud. It is a felony." The word felony hung in the air like smoke. A ripple of noise started in the third row and spread outward. It wasn't a scream. It was the sound of 300 people simultaneously realizing they had been lied to for a decade. I saw Mrs. Higgins, the choir director who had pitied me an hour ago, cover her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide. I saw the deacons exchanging dark, furious glances. "No," a woman whispered loudly from the back. "Not Denise. She wouldn't—" "He just said he heard it," another voice hissed back. "The lawyer heard it." Denise was standing near the altar, her face the color of ash, the structure of her life, the carefully curated image of the saintly caretaker, the martyr, the pillar of the community, was fracturing in real time. She looked at the faces in the pews, the faces that usually smiled at her with adoration, and saw only shock and suspicion. She panicked, and when Denise panicked, she played the victim. "This is ridiculous!" Denise cried out, her voice cracking. She stepped toward the Reverend, tears already streaming down her face. It was a performance I had seen 1,000 times in our kitchen, but never on a stage this big. "Reverend, please, you know me, you know my heart. This is just a mother-daughter thing. We were arguing this morning because I was stressed about the service. She is twisting it. She is blowing a little slap out of proportion." She turned to the congregation, her arms wide, pleading. "Mothers and daughters fight," she sobbed. "It happens. She was being difficult. I was just trying to get her to do what was right for her grandmother. I love her. I have raised her like my own." It was the wrong thing to say. Grandma Eleanor, who had been standing silently by the microphone stand, suddenly shifted her weight. She slammed the rubber tip of her cane against the floor. The sound cracked like a gunshot, cutting through Denise's sobbing. "Stop it," Eleanor said. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. The authority in her voice was absolute. "Do not use that word," Eleanor said. looking at Denise with a gaze that could have stripped paint from a wall. "You are not her mother. You have never been her mother. Her mother was a woman of grace who died too young. You are the woman who married her father and spent 15 years making her feel like a stranger in her own home." Denise recoiled, gasping. "Mother Hartley, how can you say that? I have cared for you." "You have cared for my bank account," Eleanor interrupted, her voice rising. "You have hovered over me like a vulture waiting for a carcass, and do not think I didn't see how you treated her. I saw the way you looked at her when she entered a room. I saw the way you pushed her out of photographs. But today you crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed." Eleanor took a step closer to the edge of the platform. She looked out at the sea of faces. "You all listened to her," Eleanor said to the church. "For years. I sat in that front pew and listened to Denise tell you stories during prayer requests. She told you Lena was ungrateful. She told you Lena was stealing money from my purse. She told you Lena came back to Brookside because she was fired for unethical behavior." She paused, letting the memory of those rumors settle over the room. "Well, I did something about it," Eleanor declared. "I hired Mr. Harris not just to write a trust, but to investigate. I had him audit my own accounts. I had him call the company Lena worked for in Columbus." Twist number 4. I stared at my grandmother. She had checked? She had actually investigated me? "And do you know what we found?" Eleanor asked, her voice trembling with emotion. "We found that not 1 cent was missing from my accounts until Denise started helping me pay the bills. We found that Lena was not fired for ethics. She was laid off in a corporate restructuring along with 50 other people, and her boss wrote a recommendation letter calling her the most honest analyst he had ever managed." I felt a lump form in my throat so big I could barely breathe. I had spent months thinking my grandmother was disappointed in me, thinking she believed the lies. But she had been working in the shadows, gathering evidence to clear my name. Eleanor turned to me. She ignored the crowd. She ignored the reverend. She looked only at me, her gray eyes filling with tears. "I am sorry, Lena," she said, her voice breaking. "I am sorry I stayed quiet for so long. I thought I was keeping the peace. I thought if I just let Denise have her way, she would be kind to you. I was wrong. I let you suffer to save myself the headache of a fight, and for that, I will ask your forgiveness for the rest of my life. But today I am using the last bit of breath I have to stand in front of you. I am standing with you, child, before God and everyone." Tears spilled down my face. I didn't wipe them away. I couldn't move. I had waited 15 years to hear someone in this family say they were on my side. This is a private matter," Reverend Allen stammered, trying to regain control of his service. He looked terrified that the wealthy donors in the room were going to walk out. "Mother Eleanor, Denise, perhaps we should move this to my office. We can pray together. We can resolve this as a family." "No!" The shout came from the 4th row. It was Mr. Henderson, a man who had taught Sunday school for 30 years. He stood up, his face red. "No, Reverend," Mr. Henderson shouted. "We have sat here for 5 years hearing Denise ask for prayers for her troubled stepdaughter. We have judged that girl based on what was said from that pulpit. If the lies were public, the truth needs to be public. We want to hear the rest." "That is right," another voice called out. "Let her speak." The courthouse of New Grace Fellowship had turned. The jury was no longer buying the defense. Denise looked around wildly. She was cornered, her face twisted, losing the pathetic victim look and settling into something uglier, pure, unadulterated rage. "You are all ungrateful," Denise shrieked, forgetting the microphone, forgetting the act. "I did everything for this family. I sacrificed my life, and she pointed a shaking finger at Eleanor. "She is senile. She doesn't know what she is saying. Lena has manipulated her. Lena is controlling her mind." "My mind is just fine, Denise," Eleanor said coldly. "And just to prove it, I have one more thing to tell you, something I signed last week." She motioned to Lucas again. Lucas stepped up to the microphone. He opened a second folder. "As of last Tuesday," Lucas announced, Mrs. Eleanor Hartley executed a specific amendment to the Hartley Family Trust. It is referred to as the Donor Day Contingency. He looked directly at Denise. The amendment states that if, on the day of the church dedication, the primary beneficiary, Lena Hartley, is subjected to any form of public humiliation, physical attack, or attempt at disinheritance by any family member, a secondary distribution clause is automatically triggered. Twist number 5. The room went so quiet you could hear the traffic on the highway a mile away. "What does that mean?" Denise whispered. "It means," Lucas said, "that because of your actions this morning, the assault, the coercion, and the slander you just spoke from this pulpit, the family portion of the estate is dissolved. The entirety of the Hartley fortune, minus a living allowance for Lena, is effectively immediately transferred to a charitable trust." He paused for effect. "The funds will be designated for the Ohio Veterans Association and the Shelter for Women Victims of Financial Abuse, and the sole administrator of that charitable trust, with full discretion over every grant and donation, will be Lena Hartley." Denise made a sound that wasn't human. It was a strangled gasp of horror. "No!" she screamed. "You cannot do that. That is millions of dollars. That is my money. I earned that money. I put up with you for 20 years for that money." The confession ripped through the air. She hadn't meant to say it. It was the primal scream of greed seeing its prize snatched away at the finish line. But she had said it. "I put up with you for 20 years for that money." The congregation recoiled. The mask was not just cracked, it was pulverized. Denise stood there, panting, her face twisted into a snarl of avarice that no amount of Sunday makeup could hide. She looked at Eleanor with pure hatred. "You old witch," Denise hissed. "You tricked me." "I didn't trick you," Eleanor said calmly. "I just gave you enough rope. You chose to hang yourself." My father, Mark, finally stood up. He looked like a man waking up from a coma to find his house on fire. He looked at Denise, then at Eleanor, then at me. He looked sick. "Mom," Dad said, his voice shaking. "Please, stop. This is too much. We can fix this. Let's just go home. Let's go home and talk about this like civilized people." It was the same old song. Let's go home. Let's be quiet. Let's hide. Eleanor turned to her son. She looked at him with a mixture of love and profound disappointment. "Home?" Eleanor asked. "You mean the house where you let your wife slap your daughter across the face this morning? You mean the house where you hid in the garage while this woman dismantled your child's self-esteem for 15 years? I didn't know it was that bad," Mark stammered. "I just wanted peace, Mom." "Peace," Eleanor repeated, spitting the word out like it tasted like poison. "You didn't want peace, Mark. You wanted silence. There is a difference. Silence is what happens when you cover your ears while someone screams. Peace is what happens when you stop the person holding the whip." She shook her head. "You are quiet, Mark. You have always been quiet. But today I realized something. Your silence wasn't neutrality. It was an endorsement. Every time you didn't speak up for Lena, you were helping Denise hurt her. You are not the victim here. You are the accomplice." Dad flinched as if she had hit him. He sank back down into the pew, putting his head in his hands, shrinking until he seemed very small. Eleanor turned back to the center of the room. She looked exhausted. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her leaning heavily on her cane. But she didn't step down. "I am done," Eleanor announced to the room. "I am done protecting the reputation of this family at the expense of its soul. If I have to destroy the Hartley name to save my granddaughter, then let it be destroyed. I would rather be the grandmother of a poor woman who is free than the matriarch of a rich family that eats its own young." She looked at me then, a soft, tired look. "Lena," she said, "help me to the car. I think we have said enough." I walked up the steps. I didn't look at Denise, who was standing frozen at the pulpit, staring into the middle distance as her future evaporated. I didn't look at the Reverend, who was frantically signaling the organist to play something, anything. I walked to my grandmother. I took her arm. It felt frail under the silk sleeve, but the spirit inside was titanium. "Let's go, Grandma," I whispered. We turned and began the long walk down the center aisle, but this time, nobody was looking at the floor. Nobody was whispering. As we passed the pews, people turned. They watched us with a kind of stunned reverence. We weren't the pillars of the church anymore. We were the wreckage. But walking through that wreckage, holding the arm of the only person who had ever truly loved me, I felt something I hadn't felt in 15 years. I felt clean. The organ started playing a hymn, a joyous, loud tune that clashed horribly with the devastation in the room, but we kept walking, past the stunned faces, past the shattered illusions, toward the double doors where the sunlight was waiting. The walk from the sanctuary to the lobby felt like moving through a decompression chamber. The air inside the church had been pressurized with decades of secrets, and now that the seal was broken, the atmosphere was chaotic. The moment the double doors swung shut behind us, cutting off the droning sound of the organist's desperate attempt to play Joy to the World in the middle of October, the reality of what had just happened slammed into us. The lobby was not empty. People were spilling out of the side exits, bypassing the final benediction to get a look at the wreckage. It was a state of collective shock. You could see it in their faces, the wide eyes, the hands covering mouths, the hushed, frantic whispering. For 15 years, Denise had curated the image of the Hartley family with the precision of a museum director. In less than 15 minutes, my grandmother had taken a sledgehammer to the exhibits. People parted for us like we were radioactive. Some looked at the floor, unable to make eye contact with the woman they had judged for years. Others, mostly the younger members or the ones who had never quite bought into Denise's clique, looked at me with a mixture of awe and curiosity. "Are you okay, dear?" Mrs. Gable, the librarian, touched my arm as I passed. Her eyes were wet. "You were very brave." "I am fine, thank you," I said, my voice sounding mechanical to my own ears. "We didn't know," another woman whispered, leaning in close. "Denise told us." "Well, it doesn't matter what she told us. We should have asked." I just nodded. It was too late for apologies, and I didn't have the energy to grant absolution to an entire zip code. Before we could reach the exit, a tall man in a dark suit intercepted us. It was Mr. Reed, the chairman of the Board of Deacons. He looked pale, beads of sweat standing out on his forehead. He was a man who cared deeply about the church's tax-exempt status and its reputation in the county, and he currently looked like he was watching both dissolve. "Mother Eleanor," Mr. Reed said, his voice shaking slightly. "Lena, please, we cannot just leave things like this, the accusations made in there. If the church's name was used to solicit funds under false pretenses, the church's name was used as a shield for theft." "Thomas," Eleanor said, leaning on her cane but standing tall. "And you all held the shield for her." Mr. Reed flinched. "We want to make it right. We will cooperate with any investigation. We need to document this, for the record." Lucas Harris stepped forward, interposing himself between Mr. Reed and my grandmother. "A record is a good idea. We need a private room, now." Mr. Reed led us to a small conference room off the main administrative hallway. It smelled of stale coffee and lemon polish. It was a mundane setting for the dismantling of a dynasty. Lucas closed the door, shutting out the noise of the lobby, and motioned for us to sit. "Before we draft any statements," Lucas said, placing his leather portfolio on the table, "there is something you both need to know. Something I did not say on the microphone because it is a matter of law, not theater." He looked at me, then at Eleanor. "At 8 o'clock this morning, 2 hours before the service began, my firm filed an emergency petition with the county probate court." Lucas said. I blinked. "You filed a petition? For what?" "For an emergency freeze on all assets connected to the Hartley estate." Lucas replied calm. "We had reason to believe that Denise and Mark were preparing to liquidate certain holdings. We flagged the accounts. We suspected they might try to move money before the Donor Day announcement, essentially cashing out before the check cleared." My mouth went dry. Liquidate? You mean steal? I mean transfer funds into accounts that are harder to trace, Lucas corrected, though the distinction was thin. That is why Denise was so frantic this morning. That is why she needed you to sign that waiver at 6 in the morning. She likely got an alert from the bank that a freeze was pending or that a flag had been raised, and she thought if she could show up today with a signed waiver from the primary beneficiary, she could override the bank's hesitation. I felt a cold chill slide down my spine. The slap wasn't just a burst of anger. It was a desperate, violent attempt to keep the bank vault open. She had hit me because she was watching millions of dollars slip through her fingers, and I was the only thing standing in her way. So, the service today? I started. The service was the final nail, Lucas said. But the coffin was built this morning, by attacking you, by making those public declarations of ownership over the funds. She provided the court with exactly the evidence we need to grant a permanent injunction. She didn't just lose the trust, Lena. She incriminated herself in an attempt to defraud it. I looked at Grandma Eleanor. She was sitting at the head of the table, her hands resting on the head of her cane. She didn't look triumphant. She looked tired. I didn't want it to be this way, Eleanor said softly. I hoped I was wrong. I hoped Lucas would tell me the accounts were untouched. But when he showed me the transfer request Denise had drafted, using my digital signature, She shook her head. I established the trust not to make you rich, Lena, Eleanor said, looking me in the eye. Money is just paper. It burns just as fast as it prints. I established it so that if a day like today ever came, if you were ever forced to your knees, you would have something solid to stand on. I wanted you to have a spine, not just a bank account. You gave me both, I whispered. Outside the heavy oak door, the muffled sounds of the aftermath continued. I could imagine the scene. Denise, standing in the lobby or the parking lot, trying to rally her troops. I knew her playbook. She would be crying. She would be grabbing the hands of the women she had lunched with for a decade, pleading for understanding. She is crazy. She would be saying, the old woman is senile. The lawyer is a paid actor. But I also knew, with the intuition of someone who had lived in this town her whole life, that it wouldn't work. Not this time. The recording had been too visceral. The sound of that slap had broken the spell. Through the narrow window of the conference room, I saw movement in the parking lot. A group of men were standing near my father's SUV. Mark was in the center of them. He wasn't standing tall. He was leaning against the car door, his head down. These were the deacons, the men who had patted him on the back for years. Now, their body language was aggressive. I saw Mr. Henderson pointing a finger at my father's chest. How long did you know? That was the question they were asking. How long did you let that woman rot your mother's legacy while we praised you for it? My father shook his head, his hands up in a gesture of surrender. He looked small. He looked like a man who had spent his life avoiding conflict, only to find himself drowning in it because he refused to swim. Suddenly, the conference room door opened. We all turned. It wasn't Mr. Reed returning with a scribe. It was Sheriff Miller. Jim Miller had been the sheriff of Brookside for 20 years. He was also a deacon at New Grace. He had baptized his children in the font at the front of the sanctuary. He knew my father. He had eaten Denise's potato salad at the 4th of July picnic. He took off his hat, holding it in his hands. His face was grim. He didn't look like a family friend today. He looked like the law. Mrs. Hartley, Sheriff Miller said, nodding respectfully to Eleanor. Then he turned to Lucas. Mr. Harris? Sheriff, Lucas acknowledged. I was in the back pew, Sheriff Miller said, his voice heavy. I heard the recording, and I heard the admission. He looked at me. His eyes were sad but professional. Lena, I need to ask you for that phone, and I need a statement. If what I heard is accurate, we are looking at assault, extortion, and possibly elder abuse depending on what Mr. Harris has in his files regarding the financial transfers. Twist number 7. It wasn't just a civil dispute anymore. It wasn't just a family drama to be whispered about over Sunday roast. The state was getting involved. I looked at the phone sitting on the table. The black screen reflected the fluorescent lights. It was just a piece of glass and plastic, but it contained the weapon that would destroy my stepmother's life. Not just her social standing, but her freedom. "It is accurate, Jim," I said. "Every word." "Then I have to take it into evidence," Sheriff Miller said. "And I have to speak to Denise and Mark. They are in the parking lot. I told them not to leave." He reached out a hand. I picked up the phone. My hand hovered for a second. I thought about the 15 years of snide comments. I thought about the way she made me scrub the baseboards while she watched TV. I thought about the slap. I placed the phone in his hand. "Do what you have to do," I said. The sheriff nodded, put the phone in an evidence bag he pulled from his pocket, and walked out. I sat back in the chair, feeling a sudden, crushing exhaustion. It was over. I had won. The trust was secure. Denise was ruined. My father was exposed. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow. I looked around the empty conference room. This was the cost of truth. It cleared the air. Yes, but it left a vacuum. I had blown up the only home I had. Even if it was a toxic one, I was technically homeless. I was an orphan in every way that mattered, except for the old woman sitting next to me. "Lena," Grandma Eleanor said. I looked at her. She was studying my face, reading the grief I was trying to hide. "You are thinking about him," she said, not a question. "He is my dad," I said, my voice cracking. "He is weak. He is a coward, but he is my dad, and I just watched the police walk out to arrest his wife." "He made his choice, Lena," Eleanor said. "Every day for 15 years. He woke up and chose her. He chose his comfort over your safety. He chose his reputation over your truth." She reached out and covered my hand with hers. Her skin was dry and warm. "I can fix this," Eleanor said. "Or rather, I can finish it." "What do you mean?" "The trust," she said. "The clause Lucas read today, the bad actor provision, it automatically disqualifies Denise. That is done. But Mark is a gray area. He didn't hit you. He didn't speak the threat. He just stood there." She looked at Lucas. "Lucas, what is the status of Mark's portion under the current amendment?" "He is on probation," Lucas said. "Technically, he retains a small stipend unless we prove he was an active co-conspirator in the fraud. If we push, we can cut him out completely. We can leave him with nothing but the shirt on his back and the legal bills for his wife." Eleanor turned back to me. "It is up to you," she said. I stared at her. "Me?" "You are the primary beneficiary," Eleanor said. "You are the trustee designate. I am giving you the power right now. If you say the word, I will instruct Lucas to amend the trust one last time. We can strip Mark of everything. We can evict him from the house on Elm Street. It is in my name, after all. We can leave them both in the street." She squeezed my hand. "It would be justice," she whispered. "It would be revenge, and nobody in this town would blame you." The room was silent. Lucas had his pen poised over his notepad, waiting for the order. I closed my eyes. I pictured it. I pictured my father standing in the parking lot, the sheriff talking to him. I pictured him losing the house, losing the car, losing the status he clung to so desperately. It would be a clean sweep. It would be scorched earth. It would hurt him as much as he had hurt me by doing nothing. But then I pictured myself in 5 years. If I did that, if I used the money to crush him, would I be any different than Denise? She used money to control people. She used power to inflict pain. If I used my new power to destroy my father, I would just be the new owner of the same toxic cycle. I didn't want to be like them. I wanted to be free of them. I opened my eyes. "No," I said. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "No?" "I don't want to decide right now," I said. "I need time. I am not going to answer that question while I'm angry." I looked at Lucas. "Don't cut him out completely yet," I said, "but lock it down. He doesn't get a dime of discretionary spending. He doesn't get to control anything, but I don't want to throw him on the street today." "Why?" Eleanor asked softly. "Because I am not them," I said, my voice gaining strength. "I don't use money to punish people. Denise used the inheritance as a weapon. I want to use it as a tool, and I don't want to start my new life by destroying what is left of his. I took a deep breath. But I also don't want to be used anymore. So, lock the accounts. Let him feel what it is like to have to ask for permission. Let him feel what it is like to be powerless. But don't destroy him. Not yet. Eleanor smiled. It was a genuine smile this time, full of pride. That, she said, is exactly the answer I was hoping for. She looked at Lucas. Draft the interim order. Mark keeps a living allowance, strictly monitored. Denise gets nothing. And Lena? Lena gets the keys to everything else. Lucas nodded and began writing. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, I saw the flashing lights of the sheriff's cruiser. I saw Denise being led toward it, not in handcuffs yet, but clearly being detained. I saw my father standing alone on the asphalt, looking at the church, looking at the closed doors, looking like a man who realized too late that he had bet his soul on the wrong horse. I turned away from the window. I didn't need to watch. The show was over. Now, the work began. 3 weeks had passed since the service we now referred to as the Day of Reckoning. I had moved out of my father's house on Elm Street that same afternoon, packing my life into garbage bags while the sheriff waited in the driveway to ensure the peace was kept. I was now living with Grandma Eleanor in her Victorian house on the north side of town. The air here was different. It smelled of lavender and old books, but mostly, it smelled of freedom. There was no walking on eggshells. There were no passive-aggressive notes left on the counter. We sat in the conference room at Harris and Lowry one final time to settle the terms of the trust. Lucas Harris slid the final draft across the mahogany table. The terms are ready for execution, Lucas said. Per the bad actor clause, Denise is fully disqualified. She receives 0 distribution. We have also successfully blocked her attempt to contest the will. The recording of her extortion attempt made any judge laugh her out of court. She threatened to go to the press last week, to tell them we tricked her. Let her, I said, sipping my coffee. Lucas sent her lawyer a copy of the audio file and a reminder that filing a false police report regarding the assault is still on the table if she wants to push her luck. She went quiet after that, Lucas noted dryly. Then came the harder question. Lucas looked at the section regarding my father. And Mark? Lucas asked. As the primary trustee, Lena, you have the discretion to cut him off entirely. He stood by while she abused the system. You can leave him with nothing. I looked at the paperwork. It would be so easy. It would be the kind of cinematic revenge people cheered for in movies. The scorching of the earth, leaving the enablers to starve in the cold. But looking at the paper, I didn't feel the urge to burn him. I just felt a profound need to ensure he could never hurt me again. Keep him on the stipend, I said. Enough to pay his bills and buy groceries. But strip him of all voting rights. He has no say in the investments. He has no say in the charitable distributions. And he has no access to the principal amount. He gets an allowance, like a child who hasn't learned how to manage his responsibilities. Are you sure? Grandma Eleanor asked gently. You do not owe him that. I know, I said. This isn't for him. It is for me. If I destroy him completely, I am just continuing the cycle Denise started. I want to be the one who stops the wheel. This is cold revenge. Grandma, I am taking away his power, not his dinner. He will have to live every day knowing he is dependent on the daughter he failed to protect. That is punishment enough. Lucas nodded and signed the line. It was done. A few days later, my father came to see me. He stood on Grandma's porch, looking 10 years older than he had a month ago. He didn't shout. He didn't bring Denise, who was reportedly staying with a cousin in the next county, trying to salvage what was left of her social life. Did you really have to do it like that, Lena? He asked, his voice weary. Did you have to make it such a spectacle? We could have handled it privately. I looked at him through the screen door. I didn't open it. That was a boundary I was finally learning to set. I didn't make it a spectacle, Dad, I said calm. I just refused to keep hiding the truth in the dark. You had 15 years to handle it privately. You chose not to. You could have chosen differently every single day. You didn't. Now you have to live with the choice you made." He stood there for a long moment, waiting for me to absolve him, to tell him it was okay, when I didn't. He turned and walked back to his car. I watched him go. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I just felt light. One Tuesday afternoon, when the church was empty, Grandma Eleanor drove me to New Grace Fellowship. The sanctuary was silent, the stained glass casting long pools of red and blue light across the burgundy carpet. "Go up there," Eleanor said, pointing to the pulpit with her cane. "Why?" I asked. "Just do it." I walked up the steps. I stood behind the wooden podium where Denise had stood, where the Reverend had stood. I looked out at the empty pews. "Pick up the microphone," Eleanor commanded from the front row, "and say your name." I felt foolish, but I picked it up. The system was off. So my voice didn't boom, but it echoed slightly in the quiet room. "My name is Lena Hartley," I said. "Louder," Eleanor said. "Tell them who you are not." I took a breath. "My name is Lena Hartley, and I am not the failure they said I was. I am not the thief. I am not the problem." I stopped. My throat tightened. I realized then why she had made me do this. For years, my voice had been something to be suppressed. I had trained myself to speak softly, to apologize for existing. Standing here, in the place that had been the center of my public shaming, hearing my own voice bounce off the rafters, something inside me clicked into place. "I am the one who stayed," I whispered. A week later, the most unexpected thing happened. The youth pastor called me. He didn't want to talk about the scandal. He wanted to know if I would speak to the high school group on Wednesday night. "We are doing a series on truth," he said awkwardly. "And, well, the kids saw what happened. They saw someone stand up for themselves. I think they need to hear that faith doesn't mean being a doormat." I accepted. I stood in the church basement in front of 30 teenagers. I didn't tell them the sordid details. I didn't trash my father or Denise. I didn't turn it into a gossip session. "People will tell you that keeping the peace is the highest virtue." I told them, "They will tell you that silence is honor, but you need to know the difference between peace and compliance. Peace is what happens when everyone is safe. Compliance is what happens when you are scared. Don't ever let anyone use your faith or your family loyalty to make you accept abuse. Saying no is a holy thing." Grandma Eleanor sat in the back row, nodding. She knew her plan was complete. She hadn't just secured my financial future, she had restored my voice. The trust was officially divided into 3 parts. The first part was a modest, stable fund for me to rebuild my life without panic. The second was the restricted stipend for Mark. The third, and largest part, was the new Eleanor Hartley Initiative, a grant program for women recovering from financial abuse. I was named the co-director. We were already reviewing our first batch of applications from women who needed legal fees to escape controlling marriages. The final scene of this chapter happened on a crisp Sunday morning in November. I drove myself to church. I was in a used sedan I had bought with my own money, not a flashy SUV. I parked in the lot and walked to the doors. No one banged on my bedroom door to wake me up. No one shoved a waiver in my face. I walked into the sanctuary. The air felt different. The tension that used to vibrate in the walls was gone. I walked to the front. I didn't sit in the back corner anymore. I sat next to Grandma Eleanor in the 3rd row. During the passing of the peace, I turned around. Denise was there. She was sitting in the very last pew, near the door. She was alone. She wasn't wearing her navy power suit. She was wearing a simple gray cardigan. The circle of admirers that used to surround her was gone. She was just a woman in a church, stripped of the influence she had worshipped. Our eyes met across the rows of heads. She looked at me, waiting. Maybe she was waiting for me to glare. Maybe she was waiting for me to gloat. I did neither. I just nodded. It wasn't forgiveness. I wasn't ready for that. And I wasn't sure she deserved it. It was acknowledgement. It was a signal that said, "I see you, but you don't define me anymore. You are just a part of my history, not my headline." She looked away first. After the service, I drove to the other side of town. I pulled into the driveway of a small brick bungalow. It wasn't a mansion. It didn't have columns or a grand foyer. But the deed in my purse had only one name on it: Lena Elizabeth Hartley. I walked inside. The rooms were empty, waiting for paint, waiting for furniture, waiting for life. I set up my laptop on a folding table in the living room. I logged in. I found the folder where I had kept all the evidence: the recordings, the legal scans, the notes of every insult. The folder was named Control. I right-clicked on it. I didn't delete it. A good analyst never destroys data. But I renamed it. I typed my voice. I sat back and looked at the cursor blinking on the screen. The revenge was over. The war was done. I wasn't fighting for survival anymore. I was just living. And for the first time in 32 years, the silence in the house wasn't heavy. It was just peace. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment down below and share your thoughts on Lena's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can share this message of courage with even more people.